State your name, soldier, and try to do it without putting the whole court to sleep." The judge said it the way a man flicks a crumb from his sleeve, small, careless, certain that no one in the room would dare not laugh. And the room did laugh, a low rolling chuckle from the gallery and the lawyers' benches, the kind of laughter that is really an agreement, an understanding among comfortable people that the man standing alone in the witness box is here to be made small. I did not laugh. I did not look at the gallery. I looked at the high carved bench where the judge sat above us all, and I gave him exactly what he had asked for and nothing else. "Corporal Beshan Hale, my lord. Household foot, the King's Guard of the Royal House of Harrowgate." My voice did not climb. It did not shake. I had stood 3 winters at the north gate of Harrowgate Palace in wind that froze the brass to your gloves, and I had learned a long time ago that the loudest thing a man can do is refuse to be loud. The judge wanted noise from me. He wanted heat. He had decided, the moment I walked in still in my red wool tunic with the bearskin under my arm, that I was a toy, a painted soldier, a stiff-backed nothing who could be jostled into a foolish answer for the amusement of his court. He was a man who fed on the amusement of his court, the way a fire feeds on a draft. His name was Orloff Vance, and he was, by the gold chain across his black and crimson robes, and the way the bailiffs flinched when he raised one finger, the most powerful judge in the city of Caldrith, which is the second city of the realm of Eldermoor and the seat of its high assize. He had a broad, soft face gone florid at the cheeks, a voice trained in the lower registers to roll like distant thunder, and small wet eyes that moved over a room the way a tax collector's move over a market, counting, weighing, deciding what could be taken. "Harrowgate," he repeated, leaning back, lacing his fingers across the swell of his stomach. "The Queen's own. Well, well, we are honored, are we not?" He let his gaze drift to the gallery, inviting them in. "A guardsman come down from his pretty gate to instruct the law. Tell me, corporal, they tell me you fellows stand like statues for hours and never twitch. Is that so? Do they screw you to the floor at night?" The laughter came again, fatter this time. I waited for it to die. I had nowhere I needed to be that was more important than this box and what I had come to say, and I would not be hurried into it by a man enjoying himself. "I stand my post, my lord," I said, when the room was quiet enough to hear me, "when I am called to it." "He stands his post," Vance said, mimicking the flatness of my voice, drawing it out, making it stupid. "How thrilling! And does the post talk? Does it have opinions on contracts and ledgers and the disposal of crown lands? Because that is what we are about here, Corporal Hale, in this court, grown men's business. And I confess I am at a loss to understand why the prosecution has dragged a doorpost into my courtroom to give evidence about it. I am going to tell you the whole of this, because I have heard it told wrong a dozen times since, in the taverns, in the broadsheets, even once badly by a man who claimed he was sitting beside me, when I had been alone in that box. I am going to tell it as it happened, in the order it happened, so that you understand a thing I did not fully understand myself, until the sun had crossed those tall windows, and the whole shape of the day stood revealed. That a man who relies on being feared has no idea how thin the ice is beneath his own feet, and that the truth, said plainly and without anger by a man who has decided he will not be moved, is the heaviest thing in any room, heavier than a gold chain, heavier than a high bench, heavier than all the laughter in the world. But I am ahead of myself. Let me go back to the morning, and to why a corporal of the household foot was standing in the assize court of Caldrith at all. It had begun, as these things do, with a small wrong that would not lie still. 3 weeks before, I had been seconded from the palace to escort a clerk of the Crown Lands Office, a thin, anxious, scrupulously honest man named Tobias Wren, on a journey out to the eastern marches of Eldermoor, to a place called Hollowmere. Hollowmere was Crown land, a long valley of good pasture and a village of some 400 souls who held their cottages and grazing in tenancy from the royal house, as their grandfathers had. It was Wren's task to inspect the rolls, the great ledgers in which every acre and every tenancy was written, against what was actually there on the ground, because a complaint had come up to the capital. The complaint was small and strange. The people of Hollowmere said that men had come, twice now, with sealed papers and a magistrate's authority, and told them their tenancies had been reassigned, that the valley had been lawfully sold, that they must pay new rents to a new master or quit their homes by the spring. Crown land cannot be sold to a private man, not in Eldermoor. It is held in trust by the Queen for the realm, and only the Crown, by an act sealed in the capital, can dispose of it. That is old law, older than the House of Harrowgate, and Queen Saralind held to it the way a mother holds to the safety of her children. So either the people of Hollowmere were lying, or someone had forged the disposal of a whole valley out from under the Crown, and was squeezing 400 souls for rent on land the Queen still owned. That is what Tobias Wren and I rode out to learn. I was sent because the last clerk who had gone to Hollowmere to ask questions had come back with a broken arm and a tale of bandits, and the Crown Lands Office, being neither stupid nor brave, had decided that the next clerk should travel with a king's guard at his side. I did not mind. I would rather ride a hard road with an honest man than stand a soft post among flatterers. And Wren, for all his nerves, was an honest man, the kind who counts a thing 3 times because the truth deserves to be counted right. We were 9 days at Hollowmere. I will tell you what we found there, because it is the spine of everything, and because the judge who would later call me a doorpost had built his whole comfortable life on the certainty that no one would ever ride out and count it. We found that the village was telling the truth. We found a forged disposal, a beautiful forgery, on real Crown vellum, with a seal that was almost the Queen's seal but for one wrong point in the star at its heart. We found a ledger in the Caldrith magistracy that had been altered, an entire valley struck through in the true accounts and rewritten into private hands, the ink of the alteration a shade fresher than the ink around it. And we found, threaded through all of it, in the dockets and the warrants and the orders that gave the forgery the teeth of the law, the same signature again and again, bold and broad and certain of itself. The signature of Judge Orloff Vance. That is why I had come down from my pretty gate. That is why I stood in the witness box of his own court while he made the gallery laugh. He did not yet know what I had seen at Hollowmere. He thought I had been called to testify about something small, a matter of the escort, a question of the road. He thought he was passing an idle morning, breaking a stiff soldier for sport before the real business of the day. He had no idea that the doorpost had been counting. Let me set the room for you, because a courtroom is a kind of theater, and Vance had built his to flatter himself. The highest size of Caldrith sat in a long hall of dark carved oak, the panels gone almost black with age and polish, with tall arched windows down the eastern wall that let the morning in along the floor in bars of pale gold. At the far end, raised on 3 steps so that he looked down on everyone, was the judge's bench, a great carved throne of a thing, with the arms of the realm above it and Vance's own personal device, a stag's head, worked into the woodwork to either side, which tells you something about the man. Below and before him stood the clerk's table, the long benches for the advocates, the rail of the witness box where I stood, and behind a second carved rail the public gallery, packed that morning shoulder to shoulder, because word had gone round that something to do with Hollowmere was to be heard, and Hollowmere had become a quiet scandal in the city. I want you to understand that this was not a small trial in a small room. The case on the docket that morning was styled, in the dry language of the court, the Crown against the petition of the Hollowmere tenants, which is to say that the people of the valley, having been told their homes were sold from under them, had scraped together their pennies and hired an advocate and come all the way to Caldrith to ask the law to say whether it was true. They had no idea the very judge who would rule on their petition was the man who had forged the sale. They thought the law was a clean thing they could appeal to. They had come to the wrong court, before the wrong judge, except that, by a thread none of us could see yet, they had come to exactly the right one. The advocate the Hollowmere people had hired was a young woman named Anwen Locke. I had met her twice in the days before, in the cramped office where the prosecution prepared, and I had taken her measure quickly. Thin, plainly dressed in a dark gown, with a way of going very still and very quiet before she spoke that reminded me of a guardsman before a hard order. She was not from a great family. She had no gold chain and no stag's head carved into anything. What she had was a memory like a steel trap, and a habit of believing that the law meant what it said, which in the court of Orloff Vance was either courage or foolishness, and I had not yet decided which. Against her, for the man who claimed to have bought Hollowmere, a merchant prince named Caspar Holt, fat and smooth, and seated in the front of the gallery in a coat that cost more than the whole valley paid in rent in a year, was a senior advocate named Reynard Mull, who had the look of a man who had won every case he had argued before Vance, because the verdict was decided in a back room before he opened his mouth. Mull and Vance did not look at each other. That, too, told me something. Men who are working together in the open look at each other. Men who are working together in secret are very careful not to. I had given all of this to Anwen Locke in that cramped office 2 evenings before. I had spread out on her table what Wren and I had carried back from Hollowmere, not the forgery itself, which was locked in the Crown Land strong room in the capital, but true copies, sworn and sealed in Wren's inspection record, and the names of 7 villagers who would swear to the men who had come with the sealed papers, and one thing more, one small thing, that I had not shown even to Wren until we were a day's ride from the city and I was sure of him. Locke had gone very still when she saw it. She had read it twice. Then she had looked up at me with an expression I have not forgotten, because there was fear in it, and under the fear, a hard, bright thing like the edge of a blade. "Corporal Hale," she had said quietly, "do you understand that if I put this before that court, and it is not enough, that judge will destroy you? He will have you broken back to private and posted to a bog. He will say a soldier overstepped his place. He will make sure your name is mud in every barracks in the realm. And he will rule against 400 people and put them out of their homes and call it the law, and there will be nothing I can do." "I understand it," I had said. "And you will still stand in that box and say what you saw." "I will stand in that box," I had told her, "and say what I saw. That is the whole of my trade, ma'am. A guardsman stands where he is told and does not move and does not lie. I have done the first 2 all my life. I am not about to start failing at the 3rd in a warm room because a fat man frightens me." She had laughed then, a short, startled laugh, the first I had heard from her, and some of the fear had gone out of her face, and she had said, "Then God help him," and we had set to work until the candle guttered. So that was the morning, that was the room. And now you know what the judge did not. That the doorpost in the box, the painted soldier he was breaking for sport, had ridden out to Hollowmere and counted, and had carried back the count, and had handed it, sworn and sealed, to the one advocate in Caldrith who would not take his bribe. Because Reynard Mull had tried, in a tavern, to pay Anwen Locke to lose this case, and she had thrown his purse in the fire, and that was the small thing I had carried last and shown her by candlelight. Because the man who had sent Mull with that purse was the man on the high bench, and the proof of it was a docket number, and the docket number was the thread that hung him. But all of that was still coiled and waiting. In the box, in the moment I am telling you of, Vance was still leaning back, still warm with the gallery's laughter, still certain he was the largest thing in the room. "Well," he said, "since the prosecution insists on this entertainment, let us get on with it. Advocate Locke, you have called this soldier. Pray tell us what a doorpost has to say about the disposal of crown lands, and try to make it brief, for the court's patience is not infinite, and neither, I fear, is its capacity for amusement." He smiled around the room. "Though you, Corporal, seem determined to test it." The gallery rumbled. Caspar Holt, the merchant, laughed openly and turned to murmur something to the man beside him. I did not move. I let the morning light lie along the floor and I kept my eyes on the bench, and I thought of the 7 villagers of Hollowmere whose names I had written down by candlelight, and of old Mother Penn who had stood in her doorway with her hand on the lintel and said to me, "This house was my grandmother's, soldier. Where am I to go?" And I decided, as I had decided on the road home, that whatever this fat man did to me, he was not going to do it to her. And when Locke rose, she did not look at the gallery, she did not look at Mull. She looked at me and she said in that quiet, steady voice, "Corporal Hale, in your own words, tell the court what you found at Hollowmere." And I told them. I began at the beginning, the way you check a rifle, in order, without skipping, because the man who skips a step is the man who finds his weapon will not fire when he needs it. I told them I had been seconded from the palace to escort the clerk Tobias Wren to Hollowmere, on the lawful authority of the Crown Lands Office, to inspect the rolls against the ground. I told them the date we rode out and the date we returned. I told them in plain words what the people of the valley had said, that men with sealed papers and a magistrate's warrant had come twice, and told them the valley was sold and they must pay new rent or quit. "Hearsay," Vance said, almost lazily, before I had got further than that. "The soldier is reporting what villagers say other men said. This is not evidence, Advocate Locke. This is gossip in a uniform." He waved a hand. "Strike it, move on." And when Locke inclined her head, unhurried, "My lord, I do not offer it for the truth of what the men said, but to establish why the inspection was made. The corporal will come to what he himself saw and counted. I ask the court's patience for the chain to be laid." "The court's patience," Vance said, "is a rope, Advocate, and you are paying out a great deal of it. Mind the end of it does not snap back and take your eye." Laughter. "Very well, the soldier may proceed to what he himself saw with his own 2 doorpost eyes." I went on as if he had said nothing, because the surest way to lose ground to a man like that is to give him your temper. I told them what I myself had seen. I told them that I had stood beside the clerk Wren in the magistracy of Caldreth, this very building, 2 floors below where we now sat, while he opened the great tenancy ledger for the Eastern Marches, and that I had seen with my own eyes that an entry covering the whole valley of Hollowmere had been struck through and rewritten, and that the ink of the new writing was a fresher black than the ink around it. That landed, I felt it land. The gallery, which had been a warm pond of laughter, went a degree quieter, and when Locke did not smile, but something settled in her shoulders. Vance felt it too. I will give him that. He was a stupid man in the way that arrogant men are stupid, but he was not slow. He sat forward. "You saw fresh ink," he repeated. "You, a guardsman. You are now an expert in inks, are you, Corporal? You studied the chemistry of inks at the gate of Harrowgate Palace, between standing very still and standing very still. Tell me, did the ink introduce itself? Did it say, 'Good day, Corporal, I am a fresh ink, written by a villain'? Or did you simply decide in your vast learning that one black looked blacker than another, and ride 300 miles to tell me about it?" The laughter came back, but it was thinner now. It had a nervous edge. The cleverest people in the room, and there are always a few, had begun to do the sum that Vance had not yet done. They had begun to wonder why a judge was working quite so hard to make a doorpost shut up. "I am no expert in inks, my lord," I said. "I am only telling the court what I saw. The clerk Tobias Wren is the expert. He recorded it. He will testify to it. I am telling the court that I was beside him and saw the same thing with my own eyes, so that there are 2 who saw it and not 1. A guardsman's whole training, my lord, is to see exactly what is in front of him and report it without adding to it and without taking anything away. That is the one thing I am, in fact, expert in." It was not a clever speech. I am not a clever man. But it was true, and the true thing, said Level, has a way of taking the air out of mockery, because mockery needs the other man to flinch, and there is nothing for it to feed on in a man who simply tells you what he saw. Vance's face changed. The lazy amusement was still on it, but it was a mask now, held in place by effort, and behind it I could see the first cold flicker of something that was not amusement at all. He had expected me to bluster or to wilt. He had got neither. He had got a wall, and walls are unsettling to men who have spent their lives knocking down anything that stands up to them. "How tidy," he said. "How very tidy. The honest soldier who only sees what is in front of him. We are all moved." He let his eyes go cold and small. "Let me tell you what I see in front of me, Corporal Hale, since you set such store by it. I see a guardsman who has reached above his station. I see a man in a pretty red coat who was sent to hold a clerk's horse and decided, somewhere on the road, that he was a magistrate. I see a soldier playing at the law, and let me give you, free of charge, the first lesson of the law. The law does not care what you saw. The law cares what you can prove. And a guardsman's word, a man trained, by your own admission, to do as he is told and stand where he is put, a guardsman's word against a sealed magistrate's docket is," he snapped his fingers, "that. Nothing. Less than nothing. So you may go home to your gate, Corporal, and stand very still, and leave the disposal of crown lands to the men who understand it." And there it was. He had said it. He had said the word that hanged him, and he did not know it, and neither did anyone else in that room except Anwen Locke, who went absolutely still beside me and myself. A sealed magistrate's docket. I had not said one word about a docket. I had spoken of the ledger, of the fresh ink, of the men with sealed papers. I had not said the word docket. There was no docket on the prosecution's table that morning. The docket, the particular numbered order under which the false disposal of Hollowmere had been entered into the magistracy's own register, the order signed by the judge himself, the thread that I had carried last and shown Anwen Locke by candlelight, that docket was not in evidence. It had not been mentioned. It existed in exactly 2 places, in the locked register of this magistracy 2 floors below us, where only the judge and his clerks could reach it, and in the sworn copy folded inside Anwen Locke's case, which she had not yet produced and which no one in that room had seen. For Orloff Vance to know that the case against Hollowmere turned on a sealed magistrate's docket, he had to know what was in that docket, and the only way he could know what was in that docket was if he had signed it. I kept my face as still as the gate at midnight. I did not so much as glance at Locke, but I felt the whole day shift on its hinge, the way you feel the deck of a ship come round beneath your feet before you have understood that the wind has changed. The fat man on the high bench had just, in front of a packed gallery and a court of advocates, in his eagerness to crush a doorpost, told the room a thing he could only have known if he were the forger. He did not know he had done it. He sat back, pleased with his speech, basking. The gallery laughed, relieved, glad to be told the soldier was nothing after all. Anwen Locke rose very slowly, and when she spoke, her quiet voice carried to every corner of that black oak hall. "My lord," she said, "you said docket." For one breath, one single breath, the whole hall hung in the air. I have stood at attention through a royal salute when the cannon went off close enough to feel it in my teeth, and that silence was louder than the cannon. Anwen Locke had laid her finger exactly on the wound in front of everyone, and for that one breath I thought the whole rotten thing might come down then and there, in the first hour, before the morning was even old. It did not. I should have known it would not. Men like Orloff Vance do not fall in a single breath. They have spent their whole lives building rooms in which they cannot fall, and the room does not come down because one woman names the crack in the wall. It comes down later, when enough hands have pulled, and the pulling had only just begun. Vance recovered in the time it took him to draw breath. I watched him do it, and it was almost a thing to admire, the way you might admire the speed of a snake. The cold flicker in his eyes was gone, smoothed over, and the lazy contempt was back like a curtain drawn across a window. "I said docket," he agreed, "because the disposal of crown land is recorded in a docket, Advocate Locke, as anyone who has practiced law for more than a fortnight is aware. It is the ordinary word for the ordinary instrument. If you find it remarkable that a judge knows the name of the papers his own court keeps, then I begin to understand why your clients are losing. He smiled. "Are you suggesting, madam, that I have some private knowledge of this matter? Be very careful, be very, very careful. To impugn the impartiality of this bench before this court without a particle of proof is contempt, and contempt in my courtroom is not a word. It is a cell, 2 floors down. I have put advocates in it before, and I have all the time in the world." And there it was, the second thing I learned about him that morning after the cold flicker, that his great weapon was fear, and that he wielded it the way a brawler wields a club, without finesse, simply by being willing to use it when better men would not. He was telling Anwen Locke in front of everyone that if she pulled at the thread he would put her in a cell. He was telling the gallery to be afraid. He was telling me. Anwen Locke did not flinch. But she was not a fool, and a foolish move now would have lost everything, so she inclined her head and stepped back from the edge. "I impugn nothing, my lord," she said. "I note only that the word was used, and the record will show it was used, and I am content to leave it to the record." Which was exactly right. She did not need to win the breath. She needed only to make sure the breath was written down. The clerk's pen scratched. The word docket went into the record of the court of Orloff Vance, in his own court's hand, spoken by his own mouth, and it would still be there when everything else had changed. She had set a small stone, and a small stone, well set, will hold a wall up long enough for the rest to be built. "Then we are content," Vance said, leaning back, the master of his room again. "Let us proceed in an orderly fashion, since the advocate is suddenly so fond of the record. The witness has told us what he saw, a smudge of ink. Hearsay and a smudge of ink. Truly the Crown's case stands on mighty pillars." The gallery, eager to be back on safe ground, laughed. "Have you anything further to ask this soldier advocate? Or may we release him to his gate before the candles need lighting?" "A few questions more, my lord," Locke said, "with the court's permission." "The court," Vance said grandly, "is generosity itself. I want to stop here before I go on and tell you a thing about that moment, because it is the heart of everything I have to say. When Anwen Locke said, 'You said docket,' and the hall hung in the air, and then Vance smoothed it over and threatened her with a cell, the easy thing, the thing every part of me trained to act, to move, to end a threat, wanted to do was to speak up. To say here now in front of everyone, 'He knows what is in that docket because he signed it and I can prove it.' I had the proof folded in Anwen Locke's case. I had the docket number. I had the seal with the wrong point in the star. For one long moment, with the morning light on the floor and that fat man threatening to put a brave woman in a cell, the wanting to throw it all on the table and be done was almost more than I could hold. But I held it, and I want you to understand why, because it is the only thing I did that day that I am truly proud of, and it does not look like anything from the outside. It looks like a man standing still in a box, saying nothing, while a bully wins. I held it because the proof was not ready. The docket number alone was a thread, not a noose. To pull it now, out of order, in front of a judge who had just shown he would jail anyone who reached for it, was to spend the one shot we had on a target we could not yet hit. Vance would have had Locke in a cell for contempt before she finished the sentence. He would have ruled the docket inadmissible from his own bench. He would have called it a slander and buried it. We had to lay the chain, link by link, in the open, in front of so many witnesses and so much of the written record that even Orloff Vance could not strike it out. And then, only then, put the docket on the table, where its meaning would be undeniable because everything around it had already been proved. That was Locke's plan, and it was a good plan, and a good plan is no use at all if the men carrying it cannot hold their fire. A guardsman's whole life is holding fire. That is what the stillness is for. People look at us at the gate and think the discipline is for show, that we stand like statues to look pretty for the tourists with their little machines that flash. It is not for show. The stillness is a trained, deliberate, daily practice in the one thing that is hardest for a man with strength in his arms and right on his side, not using it before the moment it will do good. A guardsman who moves when he is provoked is no guardsman. He is just a strong man losing. The whole art is to be a wall when the moment calls for a wall, so that you are still standing, still whole, still trusted, when the moment calls for the wall to become a gate. So I stood, and the bully won the breath, and I let him because the breath did not matter and the chain did, and the chain was not finished. "Corporal Hale," Anwen Locke said, "you told the court you saw the altered ledger entry. I want to ask you now about the men who came to Hollowmere with the sealed papers. Not what the villagers said of them, what you yourself learned by your own inquiry of who they were." "Objection," said Renard Mull, rising at last, smooth as butter. "My lord, the witness is a guardsman, not an investigator. Whatever inquiry he made has no standing." "It has standing," I said before Vance could rule, "because I made it under the lawful authority of the Crown Lands Office, which is written in my orders, which the court may read, and which bear the seal of the Queen's own household." The hall went quiet again. I had just said the Queen. And in the court of Orloff Vance, even Orloff Vance had to be careful what he did when a guardsman, in the witness box, invoked the Royal House of Harrowgate and laid before the court an order under the Queen's seal. Because there is one thing in the realm of Eldermoor that even a corrupt judge fears more than the loss of his bribes. He fears the crown, remembering his name. For a moment Vance weighed it. I could see the weighing. He could overrule me, strike the inquiry, bully on, but I had said the Queen's seal in front of a packed gallery, and if it later came out that a judge had refused to so much as look at an order under the Royal House's seal, that was the kind of thing that traveled up the road to the Capitol and sat down in front of people Vance could not threaten with a cell 2 floors down. He was a coward, at bottom, the way bullies are cowards, and a coward measures every fight by what it might cost him. "Let the order be handed up," he said at last sourly. "The court will examine it." A bailiff carried my written orders to the bench. Vance read them, or pretended to, he scarcely looked, and then handed them down again with a flick of the wrist, as if they were soiled. Very well. The witness was, it seems, lawfully authorized to hold a clerk's hand. The court is breathless. Proceed, advocate, and let us hear about these mysterious men. "Corporal," Locke said, "the men who came to Hollowmere with the sealed papers, what did you learn of them?" "They were not bandits," I said, "though the last clerk who went out, the one before Wren, came back with a broken arm and a story of bandits. I learned that the men who came to Hollowmere came openly, in good coats, with a magistrate's warrant and a cart, and an armed escort of 4. They told the village reeve they acted on the authority of the Caldrith magistracy. They left papers. One of the villagers, an old woman named Penn, kept her paper instead of burning it as she was told to, and gave it to me. I have a true copy of it, sworn before the Crown Lands Office. It bears a seal." "And the seal?" "It is meant to be the seal of the realm," I said. "It is very good. It is so good that the village believed it and paid, some of them, rather than lose their homes. But it is not the seal of the realm. The true seal has, at its heart, a 6-pointed star. The seal on Mother Penn's paper has a star with one point malformed, drawn long where it should be short. A man who had only ever seen the seal once or twice would never notice. A man who has stood beneath the arms of the royal house at the gate of Harrowgate Palace for 3 winters, and saluted them at every changing of the watch, 10,000 times, notices a thing like that the way you would notice a stranger wearing your dead brother's coat. I did not say it for effect, but it had an effect. The hall was very quiet now. Even the gallery had stopped wanting to laugh. The picture I had given them, the old woman in her doorway, the false seal, the long point in the star, the soldier who had saluted the true one 10,000 times, was a true picture, and a true picture plainly drawn is a hard thing to laugh at. Vance felt the room slipping and did what such men always do. He reached for the club. "This is theater," he said loudly, sitting up. "This is a performance, a long point in a star. The man is a poet. Tell me, Corporal, this counterfeit seal, do you have it, the original, here, in this court?" "No, my lord. The original paper is locked in the strong room of the Crown Lands Office in the capital, as the law requires for Crown evidence. I have a sworn true copy. A copy. He spread his hands to the gallery, delighted, back on his feet. A copy of a seal. Do you understand, Corporal? Does anyone need to explain to you that a copy cannot show whether a seal is true or false? That the whole question of a seal is the seal itself, the wax, the pressure, the dye. You have brought me a drawing of a seal and asked me to hang a man on it. You might as well bring me a drawing of a sword and ask me to believe you have been stabbed. He was almost happy now, the danger past, the soldier exposed as a fool. This is what comes of letting doorposts play at law. They do not even know what evidence is. It was a good blow. I will not pretend it was not. To the gallery, who did not know what was coming, it landed. The laughter came back, and there were men who shook their heads at me with something like pity, the country soldier who had ridden so far to make himself ridiculous. I let it land. I have been hit harder than that and stayed on my feet. And here is the thing about a man who relies on one weapon. He uses it again and again, and each time he uses it he tells you more about how he thinks. Vance had now twice tried to win by declaring that my word, my copy, my seeing, was nothing, that only the original, the document, the instrument, the thing locked away, counted. He had built his whole defense, without meaning to, on the principle that what mattered was not what an honest man saw, but what the sealed paper said. He did not know that Anwen Locke had spent 3 weeks making sure that the sealed papers, his sealed papers, would be exactly what hanged him. The original will come before the court in its proper place, my lord, Locke said quietly. I am content for now that the corporal has told us what he saw, under the Crown's lawful authority. A struckandry written ledger, fresh ink, men with a warrant and a false seal, and a village told to pay or quit. I have no more questions for this witness for now. I reserve the right to recall him. Recall him? Vance laughed. Heaven preserve us. Very well. Stand down, Corporal Doorpost. Go and find a wall to be. Advocate Mull your cross-examination if you can bear to lay hands on such flimsy stuff. Reynard Mull rose, and here the morning entered its second hour, and the screws began slowly to turn, though for a long while it would look as if they were turning on me. Mull was clever where Vance was only cruel, and that made him more dangerous in the small ways and less dangerous in the large. He did not mock. He smiled, and he asked questions in a gentle, reasonable voice, the voice of a man helping you to see that you have made an honest mistake, and the questions were knives. Corporal Hale, he began, you're a loyal man, devoted to the Queen. Anyone can see it. I serve the Royal House, yes. You do a great deal for the Crown. You'd ride 300 miles. You'd stand up to a judge in his own court. A small smile. You'd want very much, wouldn't you, to come back from Hollowmere with something, to justify the journey, to bring the Crown a villain. I saw the shape of it. He was going to try to make my honesty into a motive, to suggest that I had wanted so badly to find a crime that I had invented one, seen fresh ink where there was only old ink, a long point in a star where there was only an ordinary star. It is an old trick and a good one, because it turns a man's virtue against him. I rode out to count what was there, I said. Not to find a villain. If I had found Hollowmere all in order, I would have ridden back and reported it all in order and slept just as well. A guardsman does not get to choose what is in front of him, sir. He only gets to report it true. So you say, Mull said gently, so you say. And he settled in to take me apart. For the better part of an hour, Reynard Mull worked at me the way a careful man works a stubborn knot, not pulling, which only tightens it, but picking patiently at the loose ends, looking for the one strand that, drawn, unravels the whole. He asked me how far I had stood from the ledger when I saw the fresh ink. He asked me whether the light in the magistracy was good or poor. He asked whether I had handled the ledger myself or only looked over the clerk's shoulder. He asked whether I knew that inks fade at different rates, that an entry copied fair from a damaged page might honestly look fresher, that old ledgers are recopied all the time for honest reasons. He asked and asked and asked, and each question was reasonable, and each was a small hand testing the wall for a loose stone. I gave him the truth each time, and only the truth, and never more than he asked. When he asked how far I had stood, I said an arm's length. When he asked about the light, I said the windows were to my left and the light was good, and I would say the same in any court in any city. When he asked whether old ledgers are recopied, I said I did not know the practice of clerks, that he must ask the clerk, but that I knew the entry was struck through, which is not what a man does when he copies a page fair, and that the fresh ink lay over the struck-through writing, not beside it, which I had seen with my own eyes from an arm's length in good light. He did not like that answer. He moved on from it quickly, which told me it had held. Twice Vance broke in to help him, and both times it was clumsy. "The witness keeps saying, 'I saw,'" Vance observed once to the room, "as if the seeing of a doorpost were a kind of proof. Corporal, has it occurred to you that you might be wrong, that an honest man can be honestly mistaken, that the whole edifice of your testimony rests on your unsupported claim that you, a soldier, correctly judged the age of ink and the geometry of a star, matters on which trained men disagree?" "It has occurred to me, my lord," I said. "That is why I did not come alone. The clerk Tobias Wren saw what I saw, and Wren is a trained man, and the matters you say trained men disagree on are exactly the matters he was trained in. I am only the second pair of eyes. The court need not hang anything on me. It need only ask itself why a guardsman and a crown clerk, riding together on lawful orders, came back with the same account, and why the last clerk who went out came back with a broken arm." Vance had not wanted me to say "broken arm" again. He waved it off, an accident on a bad road, no doubt. But it sat in the room now, the broken arm, the second time named. And a thing named twice in a courtroom is a thing the gallery starts to wonder about. The second time Vance broke in, it was worse for him. Mull had been pressing me on the seal, on whether I, an untrained soldier, could really tell a true seal from a false one. And I had said again that I had saluted the true arms of the Royal House 10,000 times, and Vance, impatient, irritable, wanting to crush the line, said, "The arms of the Royal House are not so difficult to counterfeit that a man should be hanged for getting one point of a star wrong. Half the seals in this realm have a malformed point. There is nothing in a malformed point." And Anwen Locke, who had been sitting very still, wrote one line on her pad and underlined it, and I knew, without being told, what she had written. Because Vance had just told the court from his own mouth that the seal on the Hollowmere papers had a malformed point, a detail he could only know if he had seen the seal, and the seal, he had spent the last hour insisting, was locked in a strong room 300 miles away where he had certainly never been. It was the same mistake as the docket, the same wound, the same kind of slip, a guilty man's knowledge leaking out through the cracks of his anger. He did not even notice he had done it. He was too busy enjoying the sound of his own thunder. These slips, I want to be honest, did not by themselves prove anything. A clever defense could explain each one away. A judge knows the word docket. A judge has heard in chambers gossip of a malformed seal. Standing alone, they were nothing, exactly as Vance kept telling me my testimony was nothing. But they were not standing alone. They were going into the record, one after another, in Vance's own court, in Vance's own words. And Anwen Locke was gathering them the way a careful soldier gathers cartridges before a fight he means to win, not firing yet, only counting, only making sure that, when the moment came, every shot was already in her hand. That is the long game patience the gallery could not see, and that I had been brought there to make possible. My job in that box was never to win the morning. My job was to be the wall to stand and tell the truth and not be moved, so steadily and for so long that the judge, growing careless in his certainty that he had beaten me, kept reaching for his club and kept, each time he swung it, showing the room a little more of what he was. A man who will not flinch makes an arrogant man overreach. That is the whole mechanism. The stillness is not passive, it is bait. Toward the end of the hour, Mull tried his last and best stroke. "Corporal Hale," he said softly, "I'm going to suggest something to you, and I want you to think before you answer, because a man's honor is a precious thing and I would not see you lose yours. I suggest that you did not, in fact, see fresh ink, or a malformed seal, or any of it. I suggest that you are an honest, loyal, simple man who was sent on an errand, who found a village full of grievances and a clerk full of suspicions, and who, wanting to serve, wanting to matter, wanting to come home with a villain for the Queen, let the suspicions of others become, in your memory, things you saw with your own eyes. There is no shame in it. The mind plays such tricks on the best of us. Will you not tell the court honestly that you cannot be certain, that you might be mistaken, that all you truly know is what others told you?" It was beautifully done. It offered me a door, a gentle, honorable door, through which I could step out of the box without being called a liar, only a man who had been honest about the limits of his own memory. And if I stepped through it, the whole case fell, because the chain lock was building needed my seeing to be certain, not merely sincere. The court waited. Vance leaned forward, hopeful. Even the gallery had gone quiet because they could feel, the way a crowd can feel, that this was the moment the soldier either broke or did not. I let the silence sit, the way I let the laughter die before, because the truth does not need to hurry. "Sir," I said, "I will tell the court honestly that I might be mistaken about many things. I might be mistaken about the date the moon was full last month. I might be mistaken about the color of the Reeves coat. I might be mistaken about a great deal. But I am not mistaken that the entry was struck through and rewritten in fresher ink, because I looked at it from an arm's length in good light for as long as I wished, with no one hurrying me, and I have spent my whole life training my eyes to report exactly what is in front of them and nothing else. And the day I cannot trust them to tell me whether one line of ink lies over another is the day I am no use at a gate, let alone in a court. I am not certain of the moon. I am certain of the ink. And I will say so in this court, or in the Capitol, or before the Queen herself." Mull held my eyes for a moment. Then he gave a small nod, the nod of a fencer acknowledging a touch he did not expect, and said, "No further questions, my lord," and sat down. He had not unraveled the wall, and Vance, robbed of the collapse he had been promised, sat back with a face like curdled milk and called the noon recess, and the bailiffs cried the court adjourned, and the gallery rose in a murmur that was not, any longer, entirely on the judge's side. The recess was meant to be an hour. It became, for reasons I will come to, a good deal longer, and in that time 3 things happened that I must set down, because they are the part of the day that did not happen in the courtroom, and that the broadsheets never got right. The first was a small thing and a kind one. As I came down from the witness box and out into the long stone corridor behind the hall, where advocates and clerks took their bread and cheese standing up, an old man in a worn coat caught my sleeve. He was one of the Hollowmere folk who had ridden all this way to watch their petition heard, and his hand was shaking, and he said, "Soldier, they told us you'd lose. They said a guard's word counts for nothing against a judge, but you didn't lose. You stood there and you didn't lose." And he could not say any more, and he let go of my sleeve and turned away to hide his face, and I understood, standing in that cold corridor, a thing about my trade that no drill had ever taught me, that there are people who have nothing to hold on to but the hope that one honest man will stand where he is put and not be moved, and that being that man, on the days it is needed, is the whole of the work, and worth more than any post at any gate. I will tell you a little of myself here, because Vance had spent the morning trying to make me into a type, the doorpost, the painted soldier, the man too simple to lie and too stiff to matter, and I would rather you knew the real shape of me, such as it is. I was not born to the guard. My father kept a smithy in a town on the western road, and I was the 3rd of 5 and the slowest of the lot, slow to read, slow to talk, the boy the others outran in everything but standing still. I could stand still. I found, young, that I could hold a thing, a stance, a silence, a temper, long after other boys had given it up, and that this was not nothing, that there was a use in the world for a man who could simply not break when breaking was easy. I took the Queen's shilling at 17, and I was a poor recruit at everything that required quickness and a fair recruit at everything that required endurance. And the day the drill sergeant put me on the gate and I stood my first 4-hour watch without so much as shifting my weight, he looked at me a long time and said, "Hail, you've found your trade. The rest of these lads are soldiers. You're a wall. We need walls more than we admit." I have been a wall for 19 years. I have stood the north gate of Harrowgate Palace through 3 winters and 7 state visits, and one long terrible night I will not speak of here, and I have learned that the world is full of men who mistake stillness for stupidity and silence for weakness, and that almost every one of them, given enough rope, will hang himself trying to make the wall flinch. Orloff Vance was only the latest, and the fattest, and the most certain. I had met his kind at the gate 100 times, the tourist who shoves to get a reaction, the lordling who orders you to step aside, the drunk who screams in your face to make his friends laugh. I never moved for any of them, and I was not going to move for Vance. The gate had trained me for exactly this room. The second thing that happened in the recess was that Anwen Locke found me in the corridor and drew me aside into a window bay, and her face was tight. "He's frightened now," she said quietly. "Did you see him? The docket, the malformed point. He said 2 things he shouldn't, and he knows it even if he won't admit it to himself, and a frightened Orloff Vance is more dangerous than a comfortable one." She glanced down the corridor. "He's going to come after the chain before I can finish laying it. He'll try to keep Wren off the stand, or rattle him, or find a reason to adjourn for a month and let it all go cold. Wren is the link I cannot do without." The corporal saw it, but Wren is the trained man who recorded it, and the docket only means anything once Wren has put the ledger and the register together for the court. If Vance breaks Wren, we lose. "Wren won't break," I said. "He counted the thing 3 times because the truth deserved counting right. A man like that doesn't break. He just gets quieter and more exact." "I hope you're right," she said, "because I think Vance is about to test it." And she was right, as she so often was, because the third thing that happened in the recess was that a clerk of the court came down the corridor looking for me, and told me that the judge wished to see the clerk Tobias Wren in his chambers before the afternoon session privately, to settle a question of procedure regarding the witness. I did not like that at all. A judge does not call a hostile witness privately into his chambers to settle procedure. A judge does that to frighten a man where there is no record, no gallery, no advocate to lean on him in the one place the law cannot see. So I did the only thing a guardsman can rightly do, which was to go with Wren and stand. I am not an advocate, and I had no standing to speak in the judge's chambers, but I had every standing in the world to stand at the door of a room where a frightened honest man was being summoned by a frightened dishonest one, and to be a wall there too. When the clerk protested that the judge had asked for Wren alone, I said mildly that the clerk Wren was in my charge under orders bearing the Queen's seal, that I would answer to the Crown for his safety and his conduct, and that I would stand at the chamber door and not a step further, and trouble no one, and that if his lordship wished to object to a king's guard standing silently at a door, he was welcome to put that objection in writing, on the record, for the Crown Lands Office to read. The clerk swallowed and went away and came back, and said the corporal might stand at the door. So I stood at the door of Orloff Vance's chambers, a warm, rich room. I could see past the threshold, all dark wood and red leather and a fire too large for the season, with a portrait of Vance himself over the mantel, larger than life in his robes, gazing down. And I watched the judge try to break Tobias Wren without a record, and I learned from the doorway exactly how the man worked when he thought no one who mattered was watching. He began kindly. That was the worst of it. He called Wren, "my dear fellow," and offered him a glass of something and spoke of the burdens of the Crown Lands Office, and how a careful man's career could be made or unmade by a single ill-judged piece of testimony. He spoke of how easy it was in the excitement of an inspection to mistake an honest recopying for a fraud, and how a wise clerk, a clerk with a long career still ahead of him, might wish on reflection to soften his account, to say only that he had found irregularities he could not fully explain, and leave the heavy conclusions to wiser heads. He did not threaten. He did not need to. The threat was the warm room and the large portrait and the gold chain and the certainty in his voice, which all said, together, "I am a great deal larger than you, and I can make your life small." And Tobias Wren, thin and anxious and twisting his hat in his hands, sat in that great leather chair and listened, and grew, exactly as I had told Locke, quieter and more exact. "My lord is very kind," Wren said when Vance had finished, "but I counted the entry 3 times. The first time I thought I might be mistaken, the second time I was nearly sure, the third time I was sure. The fresh writing lies over the struck-out writing. I have recorded it and sworn to it, and I find that I am not able to uncount it, my lord, however kind the wine." He set down the glass untouched. "I will tell the court what I found. I am sorry if it is inconvenient." And the warmth went out of Orloff Vance's face like a candle pinched, and what was left underneath was the thing I had seen flicker in the courtroom. The cold, the calculation, and now, plainly, the fear. And he looked from Wren to me in the doorway, and for one moment the judge and the doorpost looked at each other and understood each other perfectly, and neither of us said a word, and then Vance said, very softly, "Get out, both of you. We resume in an hour." And we got out, and I knew the easy part of the day was over and the dangerous part was about to begin. The afternoon session opened with the hall fuller than it had been in the morning, because word travels in a city the way fire travels in dry grass, and the word that had traveled through Caldrith over the noon hour was that a king's guard had stood up to Judge Vance and not been broken, and that there was more to come. The gallery was packed to the back wall. There were faces in it now that had not been there in the morning. A sharp-eyed man in a plain gray coat who took no notes and missed nothing, whom I marked at once for what he was, though I did not yet know his name. 2 women in the dark gowns of the Advocates' Guild who had come, plainly, to watch one of their own try the impossible. And near the back, half in shadow, a tall, lean officer in the deep blue of the Queen's Marshalsea, the realm's high enforcers of the Crown's law, sitting very still with his cap on his knee. I will tell you now, because it matters, and because it is fair to tell it before the climax rather than spring it after, that the presence of that marshal in the back of the hall was not chance. When Anwen Locke had thrown Reynard Mull's bribe into the fire, weeks before, she had not simply done a brave private thing and gone home. She had written, that same night, a sealed report to the office of the Queen's Marshalsea in the capital, not an accusation against the judge, for she had no proof yet, but a true account of an attempted bribe by a senior advocate to lose a Crown petition, which is itself a crime, and a request that a marshal observe the trial. The Marshalsea does not answer every such letter, for it would have no time for anything else. But the words Hollowmere and Crown Land and a forged disposal had crossed a desk in the capital where, it happened, the same words had already crossed before, for the office of the Crown Lands had quietly flagged the Hollowmere strong-room evidence to the Marshalsea the moment Wren's sworn copies arrived. 2 threads had met on one desk, and a marshal had been sent down the road to Caldrith to sit at the back of the hall and watch, with the authority of the Queen behind him, and the power, if the day warranted it, to act. The court did not know he was the Marshalsea. He had come in plain blue, without ceremony, and the gallery took him for some out-of-town officer with an idle afternoon. Even Vance, glancing once over the room, did not mark him. A frightened man's eyes go to the threats he expects. The advocate, the witnesses, the record, and slide past the quiet man in the back. But I had stood guard long enough to know the difference between a man watching a show and a man watching for a moment, and the lean officer in blue was the second kind, and I felt, seeing him, the first small loosening of the weight I had carried since the morning. I was not, after all, entirely alone in that room with the truth. There was now another wall in it besides me. And when Locke rose to call her next witness, and that was when Orloff Vance changed the game. He did not wait for her to speak. He leaned forward before she had got Wren's name out and said, in the rolling chamber voice he used for his grandest pronouncements, "Before the advocate proceeds, the court has a matter to raise of its own motion." The hall stilled. The court has reflected over the recess upon the nature of this petition, and the court has grave doubts whether it belongs in this court at all. And when Locke went very still, "The petition," Vance continued, warming, spreading his hands, "concerns the disposal of Crown lands. Crown lands, as the corporal himself so helpfully reminded us this morning, are held in trust by the Crown and may be disposed of only by act of the Crown, sealed in the capital. It follows, does it not, that any question touching the disposal of Crown land is a matter for the Crown's own courts in the capital, and not for a provincial assize. This court has no jurisdiction over the Queen's lands. The whole petition is, I begin to think, improperly brought. I'm minded to dismiss it, and to refer the petitioners to the capital, a journey of some weeks at some expense before courts with a docket some years long, where the matter may be heard in its proper place." He smiled, gently, terribly. "I say this, of course, in the petitioners' own interest. It would be a cruelty to let them waste their hopes on a court that cannot help them." It was, I understood slowly, a masterstroke of a wicked kind. By declaring his own court had no jurisdiction, Vance could throw the whole case out, not against the petitioners, oh no, but for them, with a show of solicitude, and bury it in the capital's endless docket, where it would cost the people of Hollowmere money they did not have to pursue, and where the evidence would go cold, and where, with years to work, a man with Vance's friends could make a forged ledger entry quietly disappear. He would never have to rule on the seal or the docket or the fresh ink. He would simply make the whole thing go away and look merciful doing it, and the slips he had let fall in the morning would die with the case. He had found the one move that did not require him to win the argument, only to end it. I felt the room tilt toward despair. The Hollowmere folk in the gallery did not fully understand the legal words, but they understood the shape of it, the great man saying, with a kind smile, "Go away. This is not the place. Try the capital," where they knew, as everyone knew, that people like them did not win. The old man who had caught my sleeve in the corridor put his face in his hands. And when Locke, I watched her do the hardest thing I saw anyone do that day, harder in its way than anything I did. She did not panic, and she did not rush, and she did not let her face show the blow. She stood very still, the way I stand at the gate, and she gathered herself, and then she said, in a voice that did not climb, "My lord raises an important point, and the court is right that the disposal of Crown land is reserved to the Crown, but the petition before this court is not a petition to dispose of Crown land. Quite the opposite. The petition asks this court to find that Crown land has not been lawfully disposed of at all, that a purported disposal is a forgery, and to protect tenants of the Crown from being evicted under a false instrument. That is not a matter reserved to the capital. That is precisely the business of a provincial assize, to determine whether an instrument presented in this district is true or false, and to protect the Queen's subjects in this district from a fraud worked upon them. To find a forgery is not to dispose of Crown land. It is to defend it. This court has not only the jurisdiction but the duty to hear it, and I would respectfully suggest that to send these petitioners away unheard, when a forgery against the Crown has been alleged in this very district, would be a thing this court might one day be asked to explain." That last line was a blade in a velvet sleeve, and everyone in the room felt it. She had not accused Vance of anything. She had only reminded him, gently, before the packed hall and the quiet man in blue at the back, that there are people who ask judges to explain themselves, and that the road to the capital runs both ways. Vance's jaw worked. He looked for the first time genuinely cornered, not by me, the doorpost, but by his own clever move turned back on him. If he dismissed the case now, after a forgery against the crown had been alleged in open court, with a guardsman's sworn testimony already on the record and a quiet officer he could not place sitting in the back, he handed his enemies a story too good to ignore. The judge who buried a crown forgery. If he heard it, he had to face the docket and the seal. He had built a trap for the Hollowmere folk and stepped into the jaws of it himself. He chose, in the end, the way cornered bullies always choose. He chose the path that let him keep control of the room for one more hour, and gambled that he could still win it. The court, he said heavily, is persuaded for now that the question of the instrument's authenticity may be heard. The court reserves all its doubts as to jurisdiction. Proceed, advocate, call your clerk, and understand, he added, the menace coming back into his voice, that the burden upon you is now very high indeed. You have alleged a forgery against the crown in my court. You will prove it to the hilt here today, or I will dismiss this petition with a finding that it was brought recklessly, and the consequences of that, Advocate Locke, will fall on you and on every soul who put their name to it. He had raised the stakes to everything. Win completely today, or lose completely, and take the people of Hollowmere and Anwen Locke down in the wreck. Anwen Locke inclined her head. I am content to meet that burden, my lord, she said. Call Tobias Wren. Tobias Wren took the stand the way a man steps onto thin ice he has tested, and knows will hold carefully, but without doubt. He was a small man, narrow-shouldered, with ink on his fingers that no scrubbing ever quite removed, and a pair of spectacles he polished twice before he began. And to look at him, you would not have given 2 coppers for his chances against the thunder on the high bench. But I had ridden 9 days with him, and I knew what was inside the narrow chest, which was the rarest kind of courage there is. The courage of a careful man who has decided that the truth must be told correctly, and who is more afraid of telling it wrong than of telling it at all. Anwen Locke led him through it the way you lay a fire, small things first, dry and exact, building toward the flame. She established who he was, a clerk of the Crown Lands Office, 11 years in service, whose whole trade was the reading and keeping of the tenancy rolls. She established his orders under the Queen's seal, the same orders I had carried. She established that he had gone to Hollowmere, inspected the valley against the rolls, and found the tenancies all in good order on the ground. The same families in the same cottages as the rolls recorded, no sales, no new master, nothing but 400 frightened people being squeezed for rent by men with papers. Then she brought him to the magistracy, 2 floors below where we sat, and to the great tenancy ledger for the eastern marches. Mr. Wren, she said, describe to the court what you found in that ledger. I found, said Wren in his dry, precise voice, that the entry for the valley of Hollowmere had been altered. The original entry recorded the valley as crown land held in tenancy, as it has been for 300 years. That original entry had been struck through with a single ruled line. Beneath and around the strike, a new entry had been written, recording the valley as sold and conveyed to a private buyer. The new writing was in a fresher ink than the surrounding pages. I examined it closely. The fresh writing lies over the struck-out line, which establishes the order of events. First the original entry, then the strike, then the new writing. A ledger entry copied honestly fair is not struck through and written over in the same book. It is recopied into a new book and the old one preserved. This was not a fair recopying. This was an alteration of the record itself. Objection, said Mull, rising. Conjecture. The witness cannot know the order in which. He can, I heard myself think, and to my surprise Wren said it aloud, calm as still water. I can, sir, because ink that is laid over dry ink behaves differently from ink laid over bare vellum, and I have read ledgers for 11 years, and I would stake my service on it, and I have sworn to it, and I will swear to it again. Mull sat down. The objection had bounced off the careful man like a pebble off a wall. Now, Mr. Wren, Locke said, and her voice changed, sharpened, because she had come to the thing. An alteration to the ledger is a serious matter, but a ledger is only the record of an instrument. For Crown land to be conveyed, even falsely, there must be a warrant, a numbered order in the magistracy's own register authorizing the disposal, under which the false sale was entered. Did you look for such an order?
I did.
And did you find it?
I did.
The register of the Caldrith magistracy records, against the Hollowmere alteration, a numbered docket of authorization. The docket number is recorded in the register in the clerk's hand. I copied it exactly and swore the copy. Wren reached into his coat, and a bailiff carried a folded paper to Locke, and Locke held it but did not yet open it, and the hall leaned forward as one body. The docket, Wren said, purports to authorize the disposal of the valley. Without that docket, the ledger alteration is a naked forgery with no authority behind it. With it, the forgery wears the clothes of the law. The docket is the heart of the matter. Everything turns on who issued it. And does the register record who issued it? The register records, said Tobias Wren, the name of the magistrate who signed the authorizing docket. The hall was so quiet I could hear the fire crackling in Vance's chambers down the corridor, where the door had been left ajar. "Read the court the docket number, Mr. Wren," Locke said. "Only the number, not yet the name." Wren read out a number, a string of figures, and a year mark. The dry bones of the thing, and the clerk of the court wrote it into the record, and Locke turned, with the unopened sworn copy in her hand, and looked up at the high bench and said, "My lord, earlier today, before this docket had been mentioned in this court, before Mr. Wren took the stand, before any reference to a numbered authorization had been made by any witness, your lordship spoke the word docket. It is in the record. I should like the court's leave to put a single question to your lordship, on the record, which your lordship may of course decline. Had your lordship, before this trial, any knowledge of the docket under which Hollowmere was disposed?" It was breathtaking what she had done. She had not accused him. She had asked him a question courteously on the record, in front of the whole hall and the quiet man in blue, a question that, however he answered it, drove the nail. If he said no knowledge, then his slip in the morning, "You said docket," and a malformed point, sat in the record contradicting him, and a man caught contradicting the record is a man the Marshalsea will want to talk to. If he said yes, if he admitted prior knowledge of the very docket at the heart of an alleged forgery, he had no innocent explanation for how a judge came to know, before any witness, the particulars of a fraudulent instrument he had had no proper part in. Orloff Vance understood it. I saw the understanding arrive in his face like cold water. And he did the thing a guilty cornered man does when the clever path has run out. He reached, one last time, for the club. "I decline the question," he said, too loud, as impertinent, and I warned the advocate that she stands one word from a cell. The court has heard enough of this insinuation. A docket number proves nothing. A name in a register proves nothing. Registers are kept by clerks. Clerks make errors. Clerks can be bribed. For all this court knows, the advocate has bribed a clerk to enter a name. His voice was rising now, losing the rolling control, becoming shrill. "I will tell you what I see. I see an ambitious advocate and a doorpost soldier and an ink-stained clerk who have conspired to slander the bench in order to win a petition they cannot win on its merits, and I will not have it. The court has heard enough. The court will rule." "My lord," said Anwen Locke, and for the first time her voice was not quiet. It rang. "Before the court rules, the petitioners are entitled to enter the sworn copy of the register into evidence, and to read aloud the name it records. That is the petitioner's right under the law of this realm, and the court cannot deny it without itself committing the very irregularity the court has spent the day warning against. I ask the court's leave to read the name." And the hall held its breath, and Orloff Vance, white-faced, gripping the arms of his great carved throne, looked for a way out and found none, because to refuse to gag a sworn document at the moment of reading, with a marshal in the back of the room, was to confess in front of everyone, and even he could see it. "Read it," he said, in a voice gone suddenly small, "and be damned to you." And when Locke unfolded the sworn copy, she read the docket number again, to bind it to what had gone before. And then she read the name of the magistrate who had signed the authorizing docket for the disposal of Hollowmere, the name written in the magistracy's own register, in the clerk's own hand, sworn and copied true. "The authorizing docket," she said, "is signed, Orloff Vance, judge of the High Assize of Caldrith." The hall did not fall silent. It did the opposite. The gallery broke like a wave, a great rising murmur of indrawn breath and disbelief, and from the Hollowmere benches, a sound that was half a gasp and half a sob, the sound of people who have been told all their lives that the great cannot be touched, watching the great man's own name read out against him. The old man who had caught my sleeve was on his feet. The two women of the Advocates' Guild were rigid, gripping the rail. And the quiet man in blue at the back of the hall did not move at all, but I saw his eyes go to Vance and stay there, steady as a leveled rifle, and I knew the watching was over and the weighing had begun. For a moment I let myself think it was finished. I think we all did. Locke, Wren, the whole hall. The name was read. The name was Vance. The docket at the heart of the forgery bore the judge's own signature, sworn into the record from the magistracy's own book. Surely that was the end. It was not the end. This is the part I most need you to understand, because it is where a lesser day would have been lost, and where I learned the last and hardest thing about my trade. Orloff Vance was a corrupt man and a cruel one, and at bottom a coward. But he had not climbed to the high bench by being stupid in a fight, and a cornered animal is at its most dangerous in the instant before it dies. He let the hall heave and roar, and he gripped his throne and let his face work through its terror, and then I watched him do it. He made himself still, and something settled in him, and when he raised his hand for silence it was with a return of the old rolling command, and the hall, out of long habit, fell quiet to hear him. "So," he said, "there it is, my name." He let it hang. And then, to my astonishment, he smiled a thin, bitter, wounded smile, and his voice when he went on was the voice of a man grievously, nobly wronged. "My name in a register I do not keep, beneath a docket I never signed, entered by a clerk I do not control, copied by a clerk in the pay of the advocate who reads it. Do you not see it? Do you not all see it? I am being framed." He rose slowly to his full robed height, and he spread his arms, and he was, I will grant him, magnificent in his lie. "A forgery has been worked, yes, against the crown and against the people of Hollowmere, and it is a wicked thing, and the forger was clever enough to sign my name to it, so that when at last it came to light, the blame would fall not on him but on the judge who sat in judgment over the district. Of course he signed my name. Whose name would serve better? Who is more hated by the kind of men who forge crown lands than the judge who would jail them? I am not the villain of this tale. I am its chosen scapegoat. And this advocate, this ambitious woman who threw an honest fee in a fire to play the martyr, has been the forger's instrument, witting or not, carrying his slander into my court dressed as justice. And here is the terrible thing. It was a good lie. It was a very good lie. Because everything Locke had proved, the ledger, the register, the docket, the name, proved that the docket bore Vance's name. It did not, by itself, prove that Vance had written it. A signature can be forged. A name in a register can be entered by another hand. Vance had been telling us all day that a copy proves nothing, that a name proves nothing, that only the original instrument and the question of who truly made it could decide the matter. And now, he turned that very principle, which had sounded all day like the bluster of a cornered man, into a shield. He had argued himself, by accident or design, into the one defense that the evidence on the table could not break. I felt the room tilt back. I felt the gallery which had surged against him hesitate, because it is a fearful thing to condemn a great man, and Vance had just offered them a way to climb back down from the edge they had run to, a story in which the judge was wronged and the law still held, and the world was as safe as they had always believed. People want that story. The Hollowmere folk who had been on their feet sank slowly back, uncertain, robbed of their moment. Even Anwen Locke, I saw it, went still in a different way now, the way a fencer goes still when the opponent she thought beaten has produced a guard she did not expect. The docket bore his name. He said the name was forged. To prove a forgery of crown vellum you would need the original instrument, the wax, the die, the hand, and the original was 300 miles away in a strong room. And even there, who could swear whose hand had moved the pen? This was the false dawn turned inside out, the moment when the thing that had looked one came undone, when the truth was on the table and was not, after all, enough, because the truth on the table was the wrong piece of the truth, and the man on the bench had found the gap in it and stepped through. Vance saw it work. He saw the room come back to him inch by inch, and the wounded noble look on his face curdled, very slightly at the edges, into the beginning of triumph. "I will tell you what we will do," he said, gentler now, magnanimous, a great man forgiving the lesser souls who had nearly wronged him. "We will not punish the advocate for what was, I am sure, an honest error. We will refer the whole matter, the forgery, the false docket, the abuse of my name, to the proper authorities in the capital, who will find the true forger in their own good time. And we will, with heavy hearts, dismiss this petition as not proven, for a name in a register, however shocking, is not proof against the man whose name was stolen. The court is adjourned to—" "My lord," I said. I had not been called. I was no longer a witness on the stand. I had stood down before the noon recess. I had no standing to speak. A guardsman does not speak in a courtroom out of turn. Every drill of 19 years told me to hold my tongue. And I broke it deliberately for the first time that day, because there is a moment when the wall must become the gate, and I had been waiting all day, holding my fire for exactly this one. The moment when the truth on the table was about to fail, and the one piece that could save it was a thing only I could give. The whole hall turned to look at the doorpost who had spoken. "My lord," I said again into the silence, level and clear, "before the court adjourns, there is one thing about that docket that I have not yet told this court, and it cannot be forged." "You have no standing to speak," Vance snapped. "Sit down, soldier, or I will have you removed." "He may speak," said a voice from the back of the hall. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The lean officer in the deep blue of the Queen's Marshalsea had risen from his place by the back wall, and he held in his hand, raised so the room could see it, a small folded warrant with a seal upon it that even from across the hall I knew, the true seal, the six-pointed star with every point exact, and he walked forward up the center of the hall as he spoke, unhurried, and the gallery parted before him. "I am Marshal Edrin Coyle of the Queen's Marshalsea," he said. "I sit by warrant of the Crown to observe these proceedings, and where a question of Crown property and the conduct of a judge is before the court, I have authority to direct that any witness with material knowledge be heard. The corporal will be heard. Let the record show I have so directed. I do not think I have ever in my life been so glad to be a wall standing next to another wall." Vance's mouth opened and closed. He looked at the warrant, and at the true seal upon it, and at the cold, steady eyes of the man who held it, and whatever club he had been about to reach for, he did not reach for it. The Marshalsea was the one thing in that room he could neither threaten with a cell, nor bribe with a back room, nor outshout from a high bench, because the Marshalsea carried the Queen's own authority and answered only to the capital. The room had changed its master, and Vance felt it, and his face, which had been climbing back toward triumph, slid down again toward the white terror of the morning. "Speak, Corporal," Marshal Coyle said, and took up a place beside the witness box and folded his arms and waited. I spoke. "Lord Marshal, members of the court, his lordship says the docket bears his name, but the name was forged by another hand to frame him. I cannot say from this box whether the name was written by his hand or another's. I am no expert in hands, and I will not pretend to be. But there is a thing about that docket that does not depend on the hand at all, and it is this. I turned, so that I was speaking to the whole hall and not to the bench, because what I had to say belonged to all of them. When a judge of an assize signs a docket authorizing the disposal of crown property, the law of this realm requires more than his signature. It requires that the same judge enter the docket with his own hand and under his own private seal into his personal judicial register, the book each judge keeps of every order he issues, which never leaves his own keeping, which no clerk touches, which is sealed with the judge's personal seal and not the seal of the court. The signature on a docket can be forged, but the entry in a judge's own private register, sealed with his own private seal and kept under his own lock, that cannot be forged by an outside hand, because no outside hand can reach it. If the Handcuffs docket is genuine, if his lordship truly issued it, it will be entered in his own hand, under his own private seal, in his own private register, which sits, I would wager, in his chambers, 2 doors down that corridor, behind a door that has stood ajar all afternoon. I had learned this at Handcuffs, not the law of it, which Wren had taught me on the ride home when I asked him the question that had been nagging me. How does a man prove a judge signed a thing, and not merely that his name is on it? Wren had told me about the private register, the one book a corrupt judge cannot let a clerk near because it is the book that ties every crooked docket to his own hand and seal, and the one book he cannot fail to keep, because to be caught without an entry for a docket he issued is itself a confession of irregularity. It is a trap with 2 jaws. If the register holds no entry for the Handcuffs docket, then either the docket is forged, in which case Vance is innocent of it, and so is everyone, and the disposal is void and the people of Handcuffs keep their homes, which would have been a victory of a kind. But if the register holds an entry for the Handcuffs docket, in Vance's hand, under Vance's private seal, then Vance issued it with his own hand and his own seal, in the one book no forger could have reached, and his whole noble lie about being framed falls to dust. I ask only this, I said, that his lordship's private register be brought before the court and opened, and that we see whether the Handcuffs docket is entered in it. If it is not, then his lordship is wronged, and I will say so and beg his pardon before this whole court. If it is, then we will all of us know who signed the disposal of Handcuffs by his own hand, under his own seal, and there will be no more talk of frames. The hall was utterly silent, and Orloff Vance, who had spent the whole day insisting that only the original instrument and the true hand could prove anything, who had built his last defense on the principle that a copy and a name proved nothing, Orloff Vance was caught in the jaws of his own argument, because here was the original, here was the true hand and the true private seal, here was the one book that would settle beyond all doubt whether he had signed, and it sat behind a door 2 steps from where he raged. The register, Vance said, and his voice cracked on the word, is a private. It is the personal property of the judge. It is privileged. No court may compel its production. It is, there are protections. There are no protections, Marshal Coyle said quietly, for a judge's private register against an inquiry into whether that judge has forged the disposal of crown land. I know the law of my office, my lord. The crown's property outranks a judge's privacy. I will direct that the register be brought. He turned his head. Where are the keys to the judge's chambers? They are on my person, Vance said, and you will not have them. And his hand went to his robe, to the chain at his waist, and closed over the keys there. And for one wild moment I thought the great judge of the High Assize of Caldrith was going to make a run for the door behind the bench. And I think he thought so too, because his eyes went to it, the small door behind the throne that led to the corridor and the chambers, and beyond, to the world. And that at last was the moment the wall became a gate, because I was nearest to that door. I had marked it, hours before, the way a guardsman marks every door in every room he stands in, out of 19 years of habit. And when Orloff Vance gathered his robes and lurched for it, I was already moving, Not in violence, never in violence, but the way I would step in front of a gate that someone was not permitted to pass, and I put myself between the judge and the door, and I stood, and I did not raise a hand to him, and I did not need to. I simply did not move. And there are few things in this world heavier than a king's guard who has decided that you will not pass. Vance pulled up short a pace from me, his robe swinging. For a moment we were exactly as we had been all day, the great man and the doorpost, except that now the bench was below me instead of above, and the high carved throne was empty behind him, and the only thing between Orloff Vance and the door he wanted was a corporal of the household foot in a red wool tunic, standing the way I had stood at the north gate through 3 winters, eyes forward, hands at my sides, immovable. "Stand aside," he said. It came out as a snarl, but there was no thunder left in it. "Stand aside, soldier. I am the law in this room." "No, my lord," I said. "Not any more." I did not say it cruelly. I said it the way I would tell a tourist at the gate that the way was closed, plainly, without heat, as a simple fact of the world. "The Marshal of the Queen has directed that the register be brought, and you have refused to give up the keys, and you have moved for the door. I am charged under the Queen's seal with the conduct of this matter, and I will not let you leave this hall, my lord, until the Marshal releases you. You may sit, or you may stand, but you will not pass this door." "I will have you flogged," he whispered. "I will have you broken to private. I will have your name." "You will have nothing, my lord," I said, "because in about 1 minute you will not be a judge." It was the only hard thing I said to him all day, and I am not proud of it. I said it because he needed to hear it, because the only way to stop a drowning man from pulling everyone down with him is to make him understand he is already in the water. And it landed. The fight went out of him. His shoulders came down. The hand that gripped the keys at his waist loosened, and the keys hung there on their chain, and Marshal Coyle stepped up beside him and unhooked them from his belt without a word, the way you would take a toy from a child who is tired of fighting for it. And Vance let him, and stood in the middle of his own courtroom with his arms hanging, and his great robe suddenly too big for him, an old fat frightened man who had run out of rope. Coyle handed the keys to 2 officers of the court, plain men in the gray coats of the magistracy's own staff, who I would later learn had been quietly placed in the hall on the Marshalsea's instruction since the noon recess. For the Marshal was a careful man, and had not come to Caldrith alone, and bade them go to the judge's chambers and bring out the private register, and touch nothing else, and bring also the judge's personal seal if it could be found, and witness each other the whole way there and back, so that no one could later say the book had been tampered with on the journey. We waited, I do not know how long. It is strange, the things you remember from such a moment. I remember that the bars of light on the floor had moved a long way since morning, climbing the dark oak panels now, gone amber with the lateness of the afternoon. I remember that the fire in Vance's chambers down the corridor had burned low, and that someone had thought to ask, quietly, whether the judge had tried to burn anything during the recess, and that Marshal Coyle had said the chambers had been watched since noon and nothing had been burned, which was when I understood how long the Marshalsea had been weaving its quiet net, and how little of this day had been the accident it appeared. I remember Tobias Wren standing very straight in the witness box, his hat crushed in his hands, his lips moving, and I think he was praying, or perhaps only counting, which for a man like Wren may be the same thing. I remember Anwen Locke not looking at the judge at all, but at the Hollowmere benches, at the old man who had caught my sleeve, holding his eyes, telling him without words to hold on, it is almost done. And I remember Orloff Vance, in the middle of it all, making one last attempt to be what he had been. "Whatever is in that book," he said to the hall, to the gallery, pitching for the wounded noble voice again and not quite finding it, "proves nothing. A register can be planted. The Marshal himself could have. But the words died because there was no one left in the room who believed him, and a lie needs a believer the way a fire needs air, and the air had gone out of the room for Orloff Vance. He heard his own voice fall flat and unanswered into the silence, and he stopped, and he did not try again. I think that was the moment he truly understood that it was over, not when the register came, but in the silence where his lie found no purchase. A man like that lives on the reactions of others. When the room stops reacting, he is already dead, and only the body has not heard yet. The officers came back. They came up the center of the hall, the two gray-coated men, carrying between them a heavy book bound in dark green leather with brass corners and a small box, and they laid both on the clerk's table where the whole court could see, and one of them said, "The private register of the judge, taken from the locked cabinet in his chambers, the cabinet opened with the keys from his own belt, witnessed by both of us the whole way, and his personal seal from the same cabinet." And he set the small box beside the book and stepped back. Marshal Coyle looked at Vance. "Will you open it, my lord? It is your book. The court will allow you to open your own register if you wish to." Vance did not move. Of course he did not. To open it himself, to turn to the page, was more than he could do. "Then the clerk of the court will open it," Coyle said, "in full view, and read what is entered against the Handcuffs docket number which is already in the record. Clerk." The clerk of the court, a careful, frightened young man who had served Vance for years, and who I do not doubt feared for his own place in all this, drew the heavy green book toward him with shaking hands. He found the docket number, the string of figures Wren had read out, the number already written into the record of the trial. He turned the stiff pages of the private register until he found it. And he stopped and he looked up once at the marshal, who nodded, and then down again. And he read aloud, in a thin voice that nonetheless reached every corner of that black oak hall, what was entered in the judge's own private register, in the judge's own hand, beside the Handcuffs docket. "Docket of disposal," the clerk read, "Handcuffs Valley, Eastern Marches, conveyed to the buyer Caspar Holt, issued and sealed this day by my own hand. Consideration received, 4,000 crowns paid in private." The clerk's voice wavered and held. "It is signed with the judge's initials and sealed." He lifted the small box and took from it the personal seal, and pressed it lightly into a pad of wax that a bailiff held up, and held the fresh impression beside the impression in the register, so the court could see, "Sealed with this seal." The seals match. The hall made a sound I have never heard before or since. Not a cheer, not a gasp, but a long, low sound like a great breath let out at last. The sound of a whole roomful of people watching something they had been told all their lives was impossible actually happen. There it was, not a copy, not a name that could be forged, not a clerk's entry that could be planted. The judge's own private register, taken from the judge's own locked cabinet with the judge's own keys, written in the judge's own hand, sealed with the judge's own personal seal. A seal that matched, before the whole court, the impression the seal itself made. And it did not merely confirm that he had issued the docket. It recorded, in his own words, in his own hand, the 4,000 crowns he had taken from Caspar Holt to sign away a valley that was not his to sell, and 400 homes that were not his to give. He had kept the record himself, as such men do, because a corrupt judge keeps his own accounts of his corruption the way a miser counts his hoard. He cannot help it. The having is the whole point, and the very pride that made him keep it was the rope that hanged him. Caspar Holt, the merchant in the fine coat, was already on his feet, already edging toward the gallery doors, his smooth face gone the color of tallow, and found two more gray-coated officers of the Marshalsea standing in the doorway, who had been there, I think, for some time, and who took him gently by the arms and sat him back down. The buyer of Handcuffs would have his own day before the law, and it would not be in the court of a friendly judge. Marshal Edrin Coyle turned at last to the high bench, to the empty carved throne, and to the old fat man standing white and shrunken before it. "Orloff Vance," he said, and his quiet voice filled the hall, "by the authority of the Queen's Marshalsea, you are removed from this bench from which you are no longer fit to sit, and you are taken into the custody of the crown, to answer for the forgery of a crown disposal, for the taking of a bribe in the corruption of your office, for the false eviction of the Queen's tenants, and for whatever else the opening of that register, and the others I do not doubt we will find in that cabinet, brings to light. You will be conveyed to the capital, and you will be tried, as you have tried so many, before judges who cannot be bought. He paused. You spoke a great deal today of what a doorpost is worth against a sealed docket. The court has its answer. And then Marshal Coyle did the thing the whole city would be talking of by nightfall, the thing the broadsheets would draw badly, and the taverns would tell wrong, the thing those 400 souls of Hollowmere had ridden 300 miles, never daring to dream they would see. He took from his blue coat a pair of plain steel handcuffs, and he climbed the 3 steps to the high bench, the steps that had been built so that Orloff Vance could look down on every soul who came before him. And at the top of those steps, in front of the packed gallery, beneath the stag's head Vance had carved into his own throne, he took the judge's soft hands, the hands that had signed the docket and counted the crowns, and he closed the steel around the wrists. Orloff Vance did not struggle. There was nothing left in him to struggle with. He stood at the top of his own steps with the cuffs on his wrists and his great robe hanging off him, and his small wet eyes moving over the room one last time, counting, weighing as they had all day, but finding now nothing he could take, no one he could frighten, no club left to reach for. And his eyes came at the last to me, the doorpost, standing at the foot of the steps by the small door he had tried to run through, and we looked at each other for the second time that day, and I did not gloat, and I did not look away, and I did not say a word. I only stood, eyes forward, as I had stood all day, as I had stood for 19 years, and let him see that the wall had not moved. Then the officers led him down the steps, down, for the first time in his life, past the witness box and the clerk's table and the advocate's benches, down through the gallery where the people he had ruled rose to their feet, not jeering, which surprised me and shames the broadsheets that later claimed they did, but silent, the deep silence of people watching justice done and not quite able to believe it, and out through the great doors of the high assize of Caldreth, the judge in handcuffs, led from his own court by the law he had thought he owned. The doors closed behind him. For a moment no one moved. And then it was Anwen Locke who broke it, rising, turning not to the gallery but to the bench, to the marshal who now stood where the judge had stood, and saying in her quiet, steady voice with the steel under it, "My Lord Marshal, the petition. There are 400 people who came here to ask one question, and they are owed its answer before this court rises." "They are," said Coyle. "Ask it." And Locke turned to the Hollowmere benches, and she said, "The disposal of Hollowmere is a forgery, proven in this court by the forger's own hand and seal. It is void. It has always been void. No acre of that valley was ever lawfully sold. The people of Hollowmere are and have always been tenants of the crown under the protection of the Queen, as their grandfathers were and their grandchildren will be. No rent unlawfully taken from them shall be kept. No eviction threatened against them shall stand. You are going home. You are always going home. It only wanted a court honest enough to say so. I have stood at the gate of a palace and watched a queen crowned. I have heard the great bells of the capital ring across the river until the air itself seemed to shake. I have stood in cathedrals so vast that a whisper traveled the length of them. And I tell you that I have never heard a sound to match the one the people of Hollowmere made when Anwen Locke told them they were going home. It was not a cheer. It was older than a cheer, and rougher, and it came up out of 400 chests at once. A great broken sob of a sound, relief and disbelief and grief for all the nights of fear, all of it together. The sound a people makes when a weight it has carried so long it had forgotten the shape of itself is suddenly, impossibly, lifted. The old man who had caught my sleeve in the corridor sat down in the middle of it and put both hands over his face and wept like a boy. And the woman beside him, his daughter, I learned later, held him, and she was weeping too, and laughing and saying his name, and they were going home. I did not weep. It is not in me. The smith's third son, who could only stand still, grew into a man who does not weep easily, and I had a post to keep even then, by the small door, until the marshal released me. But I will own that my eyes were not as dry as they should have been, and that I was glad of the lateness of the afternoon and the long amber bars of light, which give a man somewhere to look that is not another man's face. Marshal Coyle came down from the bench at last and crossed the hall to where I stood. He was a spare, gray, unhurried man, the kind the Marshalsea is built of, and he looked at me for a moment the way one tradesman looks at another's work and finds it sound. "Corporal Hale," he said. "Marshal." "You held your fire all day," he said. "It was not a question. Locke laid the chain link by link, and you stood in that box and took everything that fat man threw at you, and you never once reached for the one piece you were carrying, the register, the trap, until the moment it would do the most work and could not be undone. That is not the patience of a doorpost. That is the patience of a soldier who understands the difference between winning a minute and winning a war." He paused. "Where did you learn it?" "At a gate, Marshal," I said, "standing still while men tried to make me move. It is the same trade, only warmer in here." Something that was almost a smile moved across his gray face. "It is the same trade," he agreed. "We do not have enough men in this realm who understand that the strongest thing in a room is very often the one that refuses to move. The Marshalsea could use a man who understands it. If ever you tire of the gate, Corporal, you will find a place at my office." He did not wait for an answer. He was not a man who pressed. He only nodded once, the nod of one wall to another, and added more quietly, so that only I heard it, "You stepped in front of that door knowing he could break you for it." He could have. He was still a judge in that moment, and you were still a corporal, and if the register had been empty, he would have had your career and your name. You did it anyway. I will see that the right people in the capital know what kind of man stands at the north gate of Harrowgate. Now go and let that advocate thank you before she bursts." I turned, and Anwen Locke was there. She did not, in fact, burst. She was not the bursting kind any more than I am the weeping kind. But she stood in front of me with the sworn copy still in her hand and the lateness of the day on her face, and there was a brightness in her eyes that had not been there in the cramped office 2 evenings before when she had warned me what this judge could do to me, and she said simply, "You broke protocol. In a courtroom. A king's guard speaking out of turn. A breath." I have never in my life been so glad to see a man break a rule. "It was not breaking it, ma'am," I said. "Not really. A guardsman's first rule is to protect the crown and the crown's people. Every other rule serves that one. When the rules that serve it start to get in its way, you have not got a conflict. You have got a clear order. I only did the thing the uniform is for." I looked at the Hollowmere benches, at the weeping and the laughing and the going home. Standing still was the order most of the day. Stepping in front of the door was the order at the end. Same uniform, same oath. I never had to choose between them, whatever it looked like. "No," she said slowly, looking at me as if she were filing the thought away to use again. "No, I don't suppose you did." Then she shook herself, and the advocate came back into her face, brisk and exact. "There is a great deal of work still to do. The register has to be sealed as evidence and conveyed to the capital under guard. Your marshal's men, I should think, not the courts. Holt has to be charged, and the men who came to Hollowmere with the cart and the false seal have to be found, and there will be other dockets in that cabinet, Corporal, other valleys, other villages, other people who never knew why the rent went up. We will be unwinding Orloff Vance for a year, you and I and Wren and the marshal. This is not the end of it. It is only the day the wall held." She permitted herself, at last, a small, fierce smile. But what a day to have held! Tobias Wren came up then, his hat finally uncrushed and back on his head, his spectacles polished for the 3rd time that day, and he did not say anything clever or fine. He simply put out his ink-stained hand and shook mine hard and said, "I counted it 3 times, Corporal. You told the advocate I would not break, and I did not break, and I would not have known I could if you had not said it to her in front of me as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. His narrow face worked. A man does not always know what he is until someone steady stands beside him and assumes it. Thank you for assuming it. You counted true, Mr. Wren, I said. That is all any of us did. You counted the ink and Locke counted the law and I counted the doors. The judge counted his crowns and his counting hanged him, and ours set 400 people free. It was a good day for honest arithmetic. Wren laughed, a startled, watery laugh, and Locke laughed, and even the marshal across the hall turned his head. And that was how the great Black Oak Hall of the High Assize of Caldrith, which had begun the day ringing with the laughter of comfortable people at a soldier they meant to make small, ended it ringing with the laughter of honest people who had, against every expectation, won. I will tell you how it all came out, because a story owes you its ending, and because the ending is the part that proves the thing I have been trying to say all along, that the truth, said plainly by a man who will not be moved, is not only the right thing but the strong thing, and that it wins not in a flash but in the long, patient way that walls win. The register went to the Capitol under the marshal's own guard, and Anwen Locke was right. There were other dockets in that green leather book, and other books behind the first one in the locked cabinet, and the unwinding of Orloff Vance took the better part of a year. 11 valleys in the end. 11 crown estates that Vance had quietly forged out from under the crown and sold to men like Caspar Holt, pocketing the consideration, paid in private, and entering each crime in his own neat hand in his own private register, because he could not bear not to keep the score. 11 villages of the Queen's tenants who had been told, with a magistrate's warrant and a seal with one long point in its star, that their homes were sold and they must pay or quit. Every one of those sales was found void. Every one of those villages kept its homes. The rents unlawfully taken were repaid out of what was seized from Vance and Holt and the rest, and if the repaying was slow and the law's wheels ground exceeding fine, they ground, and the people got their own back, which in my experience of the world is rare enough to be worth setting down. Orloff Vance was tried in the Capitol, before 3 judges of the High Court who could not be bought, in a room far grander than his own, and he was not permitted to sit above anyone. I was called to give evidence, and so was Wren, and so was Locke, and so were 7 villagers of Hollowmere whose names I had written down by candlelight on the road home, and old Mother Penn, who stood up in the great court of the Capitol with her hand shaking and her chin high, and told 3 judges, in front of the whole realm, about the men who came with the cart and the paper she would not burn. Vance's clever advocate was not Reynard Mull, who had troubles of his own by then over a thrown purse and a fire, but another, smoother still, and it did not matter, because the green leather register was on the table, in Vance's own hand, under Vance's own seal, and there is no advocate clever enough to argue a man out of his own honest accounts of his dishonesty. He was convicted on every count. He was stripped of his office, his chain, his estate, and his stag's head thrown, which I am told was broken up for firewood, and he was sent to a place where men go who have betrayed the crown's trust, and he will not come out of it, and the bench of the High Assize of Caldrith was given to a younger judge, who, by every account I have heard, keeps his private register where any honest marshal may read it, and has never once called a witness a doorpost. Caspar Holt was tried too, and the men with the cart were found, and the forger who had cut the false die with the long point in its star, a clever, frightened little engraver who had been paid in fear as much as coin, turned Crown's evidence and helped to hang the whole rotten frame, which is the way of such things. The men at the bottom break first, and the man at the top, who kept the score in his own hand, breaks last and hardest. The story ran in the broadsheets of every city in Eldermoor, and they drew it badly and told it wrong, as I have said. In one telling I struck the judge down with my rifle, which I did not. In another the gallery tore him apart, which they did not. In a third I made a great speech about justice, which I certainly did not, for I am a smith's slow third son, and I have never made a great speech in my life. What I did was stand still and tell the truth, and step in front of one door at the one moment it mattered. That is the whole of it. The broadsheets could not sell that, so they sold the other thing, and I have long since stopped minding. Anwen Locke is a judge now herself. Not in Caldrith in the capital, raised young on the strength of the Hollowmere case, the youngest woman ever to sit on that bench, and there are powerful men who do not like it, and she does not care, and she keeps her private register open. We write now and again. She signs her letters the bursting kind after all, which is a joke between us that I will not explain. Tobias Wren counts ledgers still, for he would not be happy doing anything else, but he counts them now as chief clerk of the Crown Lands Office, and when a complaint comes up from some far valley that men have come with sealed papers and a magistrate's warrant, it is Wren who decides who rides out, and Wren who insists, every time, that they look at the ink and the seal and the private register, because he learned at Hollowmere that the small, careful truths are the ones that bring down the great careless lies. And the marshal kept his word. The right people in the capital did come to know what kind of man stood at the north gate of Harrowgate, and one grey morning, some months after the trial, I was called from my post and brought before the Queen. I will not pretend I can tell you much of it, for I was more frightened standing in that warm, bright room than I had ever been in Vance's cold court, and a man does not remember a thing he is frightened of cleanly. Queen Saraland is not tall, and she is not loud, and she has a way of looking at a man as if she has the whole of his time and nothing else to do with it, which is the opposite of how Orloff Vance looked at a room, and which is, I think, the difference between a person who has true power and a person who only has the trappings of it. She thanked me. She said that the realm's tenants slept safer because one guardsman had ridden out and counted, and stood in a box and would not be moved, and stepped in front of a door knowing what it might cost him. She said that the law of Eldermoor is only as strong as the men who will stand for it when standing is hard, and that she was glad such a man stood at her north gate. And then she said a thing I have kept, the way I kept the names by candlelight, because it was the truest thing anyone said to me in the whole of that long business. They call you a wall corporal, she said. I have heard it. Your sergeants say it as praise and your enemies say it as scorn, and both of them have it wrong. A wall keeps things out. You did not keep anything out. You let the truth in and held the door open until everyone else could come through. That is not a wall. That is a gate. And a gate that knows when to open is worth more to a kingdom than all its walls. Then she gave me her hand, and I did not weep, but it was a near thing, and I went back to my post. I stand it still. The north gate of Harrowgate Palace, in wind that freezes the brass to your gloves through the long 4-hour watches, while the tourists with their little flashing machines try to make me twitch, and the lordlings order me to step aside, and the drunks scream in my face to make their friends laugh. I never move for any of them. They think the stillness is for show. They think I am a painted soldier, a doorpost, a stiff-backed nothing. Let them think it. I know what the stillness is for now better than I knew it before. It is not for show, and it is not for them. It is so that on the day it matters, the day a frightened village has nowhere to turn, the day an honest clerk needs someone steady to stand beside, the day a great man tries to run for a small door, the wall will still be standing, whole and trusted and unmoved, ready to become a gate. A judge once mocked me in his own court, and made the comfortable people laugh, and told me a guardsman's word was worth less than nothing against a sealed docket. Minutes later he was the one in handcuffs, led down his own steps and out his own doors by the law he thought he owned, and 400 people went home. He was right about one thing in the end. My word was worth less than nothing against a sealed docket. So I did not give them my word. I gave them the truth and the law and a wall that would not move, and those three, it turns out, are worth a great deal more than any docket a man can seal. I learned that in a black oak courtroom on a long amber afternoon, and I have stood my gate the better for it every day since, and I will stand it, God willing, until they put me where old soldiers go, eyes forward, hands at my sides, ready to open when it matters. That is the whole of it told true in the order it happened. Count it 3 times if you like. It will come out the same.